damn it.
Hey, listeners and viewers. This episode comes with an advisory warning. I advise you to download this episode immediately. States like Florida may block it, as I'm about to educate you on what racists would call critical race theory. You know, what everyone who's not a racist POS calls history and facts. You are now about to witness the power of writer geek knowledge. Hello and welcome back. Last episode, I talked about independent filmmaker Melvin Van Peebles, creator of the movies Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song and Watermelon Man. I mentioned he had a son, Mario, no relation to Luigi. Following in his father's footsteps and with encouragement from Clint Eastwood, Mario brought us a game changer of a movie, New Jack City. In this episode, we'll look at how the movie simultaneously educates and entertains, taking what could have been a forgettable gangster movie and elevating it to a classic that influences to this day. Don't believe me on its legacy? Walk into any room of black folk and ask, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And see how quickly they respond, "Yes, I am." To elevate his movie above the generic boring stuff, Van Peebles used 4 elements. We'll call them New Jack Techniques. Those elements are an abstract evil that plagues a community, a strong antagonist to embody that evil, a strong protagonist diametrically opposed to the evil, and the humanized faces of the community so the audience knows why the protagonist has to defeat the evil. Come with me as we take a trip to a place where you might live, or at least may want to write about. Unfortunately, I can't bring along Laverne Troop to kick the ballistics. Though you probably came to your story from a character or a situation, inevitably you'll need to decide what the story is about from a moral standpoint. That's your theme. What are you trying to say to the world? In stories, the theme is often underrepresented with something like, evil bad, hero defeated. That's generic and boring. You don't want to be generic nor boring, do you? The best way to get to your theme is to pick a topic you want to address that has a negative impact on a real community. You can look at how power corrupts, or jealousy, strife between lovers, brothers, sisters. You can also use social topics like mass shootings, terrorism, racism, or, in the case of a New Jack City, the drug epidemic. New Jack City dropped in 1991, right in the middle of the hip-hop craze and the lingering crack epidemic from the 1980s. That epidemic brought us Ronald Reagan's war on drugs, in which law enforcement used mass incarceration to fight the problem. Not only did crack ravage black communities with the evil of addiction, people who were already at the low end of the economic scale were getting felonies that would negatively impact their opportunities for the rest of their lives. Funny thing though, in the 2010s, when opioids and meth became the crack epidemic for the white community, the solution was not mass incarceration, but rehabilitation and empathy. But I digress. As an example, let's do a story about how power corrupts. To set up the corruption, you have to establish how the community was before the corruption set in. Then, show how that corruption brings down the community. Once prosperous stores are shuttered, brownstones are covered in graffiti, run down, unoccupied. This element ties into the 4th element, which we'll discuss in a bit. For now, let's get to that 2nd element, the antagonist who embodies the evil plaguing the community. For New Jack City, we get Wesley Snipes as Nino Brown. According to his Blu-ray commentary, Mario Van Peebles' intent with Nino was to explain that when you tell a culture, black people, you can't own land, you can't get loans, which was called redlining, you can't do the things that the dominant culture, white people, does to get ahead, You force that culture to look at the bottom, at the underdog, and push in from there. That bottom tends to be gangsters. Van Peebles points out that America was founded on being gangsta. When the Europeans came over, they gangstered the Native Americans out of their land. Later, they gangstered Africans into building the antebellum South for free. In New Jack City, Nino and his cash money brothers gangster the drug trade away from the Italians and other criminals. Nino may be a criminal, but he's as much an entrepreneur as a Jeff Bezos. Nino is just honest about being a gangsta. When you think about it, Nino and the C&B are more representative of the American way than that idea of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. Let's go back to our example of power and how it can corrupt. Perhaps your antagonist started as a homegrown politician intent on getting better housing for her community. But then those dollar bills came in, and that housing became high-rises her community, unfortunately, couldn't afford to live in. They get pushed out. Now your antagonist rides with the fat cats and forgets her community. But then members of the community fight to stay, threatening her high-rise plans. And her money! The antagonist maintains her facade of, oh, I'm here to help the community, but secretly hires goons to buy up properties, raise rents, and evict people. When that doesn't work, the goons burn down houses and beat members of the community. Not only have you shown your theme of power corrupting, you're also giving examples showing the evil against the community and the antagonist's role within. With your antagonist established, you need that protagonist diametrically opposed to the antagonist's evil, the third New Jack technique. Van Peebles knew black audiences would buy into Nino due to his machismo and his charisma. It helped they could finally go to the movies and see someone who looks like them, who's not merely a man in the movie, but the man in the movie. Representation matters, my bitches. But Nino is the bad guy. He's evil, and he has to go down. The protagonist has to be able to hold his own against the antagonist and, eventually, win the audience's support in taking down the antagonist. Casting against type, Van Peebles brought in rapper Ice-T to play Detective Scotty Appleton. Van Peebles used Ice-T's street cred to make him a protagonist cop who could chameleon his way into the underworld. But the protagonist also has to show two things the antagonist lacks: integrity and a concern for the community. Early in the movie, Appleton watches some kids and their teacher denouncing drugs. Unfortunately, empty crack vials litter the schoolyard. Ice-T gives a convincing look of sadness at the dilemma. Build moments like this for your protagonists to display their concern for the community. Another thing, show that your protagonist is as competent as the antagonist. When the undercover job at the Carter goes tits up, Ice-T doesn't back down. He goes in to do the job himself. Nino doesn't give up $1 million operation after the Carter falls. He looks for the next connect. The audience should think of the antagonist and the protagonist as two freight trains on an inevitable collision course. Don't let one of them waffle as if they're going to slip off the track, because your audience's attention will waffle too, and they'll slip out of your story. Lose the entertainment value, lose the opportunity to educate. Going back to our slum lady antagonist, what kind of protagonist would be diametrically opposed to her bullshit? I mean, her evil. How about another character who also grew up in the community but found a way out? Lawyer, accountant? Let's go with accountant. Boring? Just wait. Say the accountant tried working with local officials to find the money to help the community. When the antagonist rose up, the protagonist thought, hey, an ally who's already in the system. But the antagonist uses the accountant to further her goals, not his. Betrayal! The accountant could then start following the money and realize the antagonist's power comes from parties interested in destroying the community, not helping it. Now the antagonist has to prove this before the antagonist sends the goons to kill him. There's your action without a propaganda and yet another generic hero cop. In talking about New Jack City, Van Peebles explained he wanted the audience to see the dangers of the drug trade, why it hurt the black community, and why gangsters like Nino had to go down. This represents New Jack Technique 4, the Humanized Faces of the community. This element is what ultimately elevates the story. Instead of an insular, generic tale of good versus evil, you have a mature, nuanced tale that discusses the many sides of your theme. But yes, you still have the action-packed struggle between the protagonist and antagonist. Van Peebles turned to a comedian from Saturday Night Live named Chris Rock to play drug addict Pookie. By taking us on the emotional ride that is addiction, Van Peebles, through Rock, showed us something we rarely see in the generic gangster film: the human cost of the evil on the community. Now sure, New Jack City could have coasted on the idea that drugs bad, so they must be stopped. Dudes like Steven Seagal and lesser action movie stars. Wait, can you get less than Steven Seagal? Anyway, lesser action stars have made dozens of forgettable action movies on the premise of drugs bad, beat 'em up. But think of the impact when you see why drugs are bad. Does anyone want to end up with chalk white lips beating up a girlfriend in a trash-strewn stairwell, or suffer painful withdrawals like we see with Pookie? If you answered yes, you might be a crackhead! Please get help. For the rest of us, I'ma guess the answer is a strong hails to the no. If you don't expose the audience to these elements, they won't think about the real-world implications of the evil your theme exposes. If you can get your audience to think while they're being entertained, you have a real chance to educate and then, just maybe, change some minds. These humanized face characters don't have to get a great deal of story time either. Use them in quick hits to hammer out their role, then move them along. If you can use them for multiple functions like exposition while showing the humanity of the community, so much the better. A great example in New Jack City is the old man who calls Nino, "Idolater! You're killing your own people!" He pops up in the background and steadily moves to the foreground, ultimately becoming the one who takes Nino down. Yeah, I just gave you a spoiler for a 31-year-old movie. Oopsie! Van Peebles suggests that if you really want to endear the humanized face to the audience, use humor. Pookie was asked if he could program Pascal, and he responded, "Can a white man dance?" Better tell a joke than to give a straight, boring answer. But a warning. Don't let revealing your theme become too preachy, with characters standing around making platitudes or slogans. Unfortunately, you have to entertain as well as educate in today's short attention span, willfully ignorant society. Alienate your audience with a soapbox moment, and your story becomes a parody like an after-school special. For my millennial and younger viewers, we used to have these things called after-school specials that would explain the ills of some social issue.
An innocent little girl.
Thank you for the nice present.
You're my very special birthday girl.
Whose life would never be the same.
This is our secret.
Only one person knew the truth.
I don't like the way Don plays.
Only one person could help.
You'll never be alone with him again. I promise you.
And now, don't touch.
They stopped doing them because we laughed them into oblivion. Like we did Nancy Reagan's "Just say no to drugs." Wrapping up our corruption example story. Perhaps the humanized face of your community could be that mom and pop shop owner for whom the protagonist did pro bono accountant work. They get forced out of their business by the antagonist's goons. What if that mom and pop were the antagonist's parents? That would show a level of betrayal that would instantly make the audience hate the antagonist. Remember, the audience may initially like your antagonist, maybe even empathize with their reasons for wanting to succeed. But ultimately, that antagonist has to go full evil bastardo and betray the trust of the audience. Just like Nino betrays his partners in the CMB. I mean, dude is evil. You're not supposed to root for the evil guy, despite what Trump voters may think. Well, that's my look at how new Jack Techniques can elevate your story from a generic tale to something with meaning that resonates long after the audience has left the building. What are those new Jack Techniques again, Mark? An abstract evil that plagues a community, a strong antagonist to embody that evil, a strong protagonist diametrically opposed to the evil, and the humanized faces of the community, so the audience knows why the protagonist has to defeat the evil. You can apply these new Jack techniques to your favorite stories. Let me know what you find in the comments below. If there's a movie you'd like me to analyze, you can post that in the comments too. As I wrap up, be sure to sign up for the Thoughts from the Shed newsletter via the pop-up at writermarkwhitten.com, also known as shadowdancesaga.com. Or check the notes in the descriptions on YouTube or your podcast app. In the newsletter, you'll get the latest chapter of my fanfiction set in the world of Conan the Barbarian, in addition to pop culture news and updates from the Wooden Shed. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast or the channel on YouTube. Again, thanks for watching, and see you in 2. Or 2. Or maybe in 2? Or 2. New Jack City, Melvin Van Peebles, Mario Van Peebles. Go see all their movies. Get educated so that way we can circle back and talk about it again another time.